Peter Sellers died on July 24, 1980, at the London clinic of a heart attack. He was 54 years old. He had been in the city for only a few days, returned from Switzerland to do some work, and by most accounts had seemed, if not well, then at least functional. He had been making films. He had plans. 4 weeks later, his will was read. 3 of his 4 children, Michael, Sarah, and Victoria, received £800 each. His 4th child, a daughter not yet born, received nothing. His estranged wife, Lynne Frederick, a woman 21 years his junior from whom he had been actively attempting to obtain a divorce in the months before his death, was named sole executor and primary beneficiary. She received what remained of the estate, somewhere between £4 and £5 million. The children did not contest the will in any meaningful way. They could not. It was legally sound. The money was Lynne Frederick's. This is that story. Chapter 1. The Man with Many Faces. Peter Richard Henry Sellers was born on September 8, 1925, in Southsea, Portsmouth, to a family of variety performers. His father, Bill, played piano in traveling shows. His mother, Peg, was the dominant presence, controlling, devoted, occasionally suffocating in ways that Sellers himself would describe in interviews with unusual frankness for a man of his generation. He was an only child. The family moved constantly. Stability was something other people had. He found, early on, that he could disappear into other people. He was not, by any conventional measure, a presence before he became a performer. He was thin, awkward, uncertain in his own skin. But when he became someone else, when he adopted a voice, an accent, a posture, a way of moving through a room that was not his own, something shifted. He became fluent. He became, briefly, whole. This would remain the central paradox of his life. As a performer, he was among the most technically gifted of his generation. As himself, he was, by most accounts of the people who knew him best, genuinely difficult to locate. He told one interviewer that there was no Peter Sellers, that the person underneath the performances did not exist. He was not speaking metaphorically. He joined the Royal Air Force during the Second World War and served in the entertainments division, performing for troops. After demobilization, he worked the variety circuit, honing impressions, developing timing. By 1951, he had married Anne Howe, a woman he would describe later as the most normal and decent person he had ever been with, a description he offered, typically, after the marriage had already collapsed. The BBC radio program The Goon Show, which he co-created and performed from 1951 to 1960, established him as a national figure in Britain. The show was chaotic, irreverent, built around a kind of controlled madness that the British public found both baffling and irresistible. His characters were precise, each voice technically distinct, each inhabiting a different register of absurdity. For 9 years, he performed those characters every week. The leap to film came in the late 1950s. I'm All Right, Jack in 1959. The Millionairess in 1960, opposite Sophia Loren, with whom he became briefly infatuated. An infatuation he later described as a genuine breakdown, a moment when the line between performance and reality dissolved in a way he could not reconstruct. Loren did not reciprocate. He wrote her letters. She did not respond. He recovered. Dr. Strangelove came in 1964. Stanley Kubrick's black comedy about nuclear annihilation gave Sellers 3 roles: an RAF officer, an American president, and the title character, a former Nazi scientist with an arm that will not stop giving the Hitler salute. The film is now considered one of the great works of American cinema. At the time, it was controversial. Sellers received an Academy Award nomination. The performance made him internationally the kind of actor other actors studied. Chapter 2. The Marriages. Anne Howe was first. They married in 1951. They had 2 children. Michael in 1954, Sarah in 1957. The marriage lasted until 1961, undone by Sellers's restlessness, his mood swings, and by his infatuation during the filming of The Millionairess with Sophia Loren. He asked Loren to marry him. She declined. He returned to Anne briefly and then left permanently. The divorce was finalized. He described the breakdown of the marriage in subsequent years with a combination of guilt and self-exculpation that those who knew him found characteristic. Britt Ekland was second. She was 21 years old when they met in 1963. Swedish, a model, later an actress. They married after 10 days. He was 38. She was, by her own subsequent account, entirely unprepared for what followed. A man who could be, within the same afternoon, devoted and cold, generous and vindictive, present and entirely absent. Victoria was born in 1965. By 1968, the marriage was over. Miranda Quarry was third in 1970. She was 21, the stepdaughter of a prominent British aristocrat. The marriage lasted 3 years. There were no children. People who knew them during this period have described a relationship that was calmer than its predecessors, which is not the same as saying it was happy. Lynne Frederick was fourth. They met in 1977 at a dinner party in Los Angeles. She was 22. He was 51. She was, at the time, a working actress. She had appeared in several British films, including a David Lean production, and had a career that, while not remarkable, was legitimate. He pursued her with the intensity that had characterized his approach to each of his marriages. They married within months. Chapter 3. The Heart. On April 5, 1964, Peter Sellers suffered a series of massive heart attacks in Los Angeles. He was 38 years old. At one point, his heart stopped. He was resuscitated. Over the course of a single night, doctors recorded up to 8 cardiac episodes. He was clinically dead, by some accounts, for short intervals. He survived. He described the experience afterward in terms that mixed the spiritual with the pragmatic. He said he had felt himself leaving his body, that he had experienced something that he could not characterize as anything other than peace, and that he had been pulled back by forces he did not understand. He was not, by conventional measure, a religious man. But the 1964 episode altered something. He became, in subsequent years, interested in the occult, in psychics, in various forms of spiritual consultation that people around him found alarming. He consulted clairvoyance before making major decisions. He believed in omens. He took seriously, more seriously than most, the possibility that the dead could communicate. His heart was permanently damaged. He knew this. Every doctor who examined him over the following 16 years told him variations of the same thing. His cardiac health was fragile. The original attacks had left structural damage that could not be repaired, and he needed to moderate his lifestyle accordingly. He did not moderate his lifestyle accordingly. He worked constantly. He smoked. He drank, though not to excess by the standards of his industry. He took on projects he should not have taken, worked through exhaustion he should not have ignored, and treated the warnings of his physicians with the selective attention of a man who had survived something once and allowed that survival to become a form of permission. By the late 1970s, with the Pink Panther franchise giving him his largest international audience, he was physically deteriorating. The films made money. He made more of them. There are 5 Pink Panther films featuring Sellers as Inspector Clouseau, plus one partly completed at his death. He found the character, the hapless, oblivious, catastrophically self-assured French detective, both lucrative and, by some accounts, genuinely pleasurable to inhabit. It was a simpler kind of performance than Strangelove. It required charm more than precision. He had charm when he chose to deploy it. Chapter 4. The last marriage. By 1978, the marriage to Lynne Frederick was in difficulty. This was not widely reported because Sellers had been effective throughout his life at controlling what appeared in print about his private circumstances. But the people around him knew. The marriage had begun to follow the same trajectory as its predecessors: initial intensity, rapid disillusionment, escalating conflict. He consulted his psychic advisors about the marriage. He consulted lawyers. He told friends, with some regularity during 1979 and 1980, that he intended to divorce Lynne. He had instructed solicitors to begin the process. The divorce had not, at the time of his death, been finalized. This would matter considerably. What the marriage produced, beside the conflict, was a revised will. In 1979, Sellers updated his testamentary documents. The new will named Lynne Frederick as executor and primary beneficiary of the estate. It allocated £800 each to Michael, Sarah, and Victoria, his 3 children from his first 2 marriages. His 4th child, a daughter from his relationship with another woman, had not yet been born and was not mentioned. Why £800? The question was asked after his death by journalists, by the children's advisors, by people who had known the family. The answer that emerged from sources close to Sellers' legal and financial affairs was that he had intended to revise the will again before the divorce was complete. He had not done so. The will that existed at the moment of his death was the will that stood. Chapter 5, July 1980. In July 1980, Peter Sellers was in Switzerland, where he had lived for tax purposes for several years. He flew to London. He was preparing to work on a film called The Romance of the Pink Panther, which he had co-written and planned to begin production on later in the year. He checked into the Dorchester Hotel and then into the London clinic for what was described as a routine cardiac checkup. On the night of July 23rd, he had dinner with an old friend. He seemed, by the friend's subsequent account, in reasonable spirits. He was looking forward to the film. He spoke about his plans. He went back to the clinic. He died in the early hours of July 24th. The official cause was a massive myocardial infarction. His heart, which had been failing in degrees since 1964, finally stopped in a way that medicine could not reverse. He was 54 years old. His 4th child, a daughter he had not yet acknowledged publicly, would be born after his death. Chapter 6. The will. The estate was valued at approximately £4 million at the time of probate, though estimates from various sources ranged as high as £6 million. There was the money from the Pink Panther films, which continued to earn royalties. There were assets in Switzerland, in the United States, in Britain. There were rights and residuals. The precise figure has never been publicly disclosed. Lynne Frederick, as sole executor, controlled all of it. Michael Sellers, who was 26 at the time of his father's death, gave interviews. He said the £800 was an insult. He said his father had intended to change the will. He said Lynne Frederick had exercised influence over his father that had not been apparent from the outside. He was careful, legally, about exactly what he implied. He was less careful in private. Sarah Sellers was 23. She was, in subsequent years, the more publicly reticent of the 2 older children. What she has said in interviews has been measured. She has described a father who was emotionally unavailable, who was often absent, who could be generous and then cold. She has not, in any public forum, spoken at length about the will. Victoria Sellers, the daughter from the marriage to Britt Eklund, was 15 years old when her father died. She received £800. She would go on to have a public life of her own, modeling, acting, several difficult years, a recovery. She has spoken about her father with a complexity that is not resentment exactly and not forgiveness exactly. Something harder to name than either. The £800 was not a practical sum. It was not intended to support any of them. It was, in the language of British estate law, a bequest sufficient to demonstrate that the testator had not forgotten the recipients, that they had been considered and consciously excluded from the primary distribution. This is a legal distinction. Whether it constitutes a moral one is a different question. Chapter 7. Lynne Frederick. Lynne Frederick was born on July 25, 1954, in Avley, Essex. She began her acting career in the late 1960s, appearing in British horror films and eventually in more substantial productions. She was 22 years old when she met Peter Sellers. She was 27 when he died. After his death, she controlled the estate for several years. She was involved in decisions about what films were completed, what projects were authorized, how his image and legacy were managed. She was not, by most accounts, warmly received in these dealings by his former colleagues and associates. She was, by all accounts, assertive in the exercise of her authority. In 1981, she married David Frost, the television interviewer. The marriage lasted approximately 2 years. In 1982, she had a daughter. She continued to manage aspects of the Sellers estate. She suffered from various health problems in the years that followed. She became, in the public accounts of Peter Sellers' life, a largely unsympathetic figure, the young wife who took everything and gave little. She died on April 27, 1994, of heart and kidney failure. She was 39 years old. Her estate, when probated, was valued at approximately £4 million, roughly what she had inherited from Peter Sellers, accounting for various transactions and the money from her own career. Most of it passed to her daughter. Michael Sellers had spent years trying to persuade the courts to revisit the original will. He had not succeeded. Chapter 8. The children. Michael Sellers became, in the years after his father's death, the most vocal of the 3 children in public. He wrote a memoir. He gave interviews. He made clear his view that the will had been constructed under circumstances that did not reflect his father's genuine intentions, and that Lynne Frederick's influence over a man who was, by 1979, in poor health and erratic judgment, had been decisive. He described, in his memoir, a father who was both compelling and impossible. A man who could make a room feel inhabited in a way that ordinary presence did not produce, and who could also, within the same visit, become cold, remote, cutting. He described a childhood in which his father was intermittently present and consistently unpredictable. He described the 800 pounds not as an oversight, but as a statement. And he described it as a statement that had not originated with his father. Sarah Sellers has spoken less. Victoria Sellers lived publicly and sometimes chaotically in the decades after her father's death, and has given interviews in which she has discussed the difficulty of being raised in the aftermath of a famous and absent parent. She has been open about periods of personal crisis. She has arrived, apparently, at something like stability. The 800 pounds is not the organizing fact of her life. It is one fact among many. The 4th child, the daughter born after Sellers' death, has remained entirely out of the public eye. What she has inherited, what she knows of her father, what she makes of the will that predated her existence, none of this is documented. She has not spoken to journalists. She has not appeared at events connected to her father's legacy. She is, in every available record, absent. Chapter 9. What remains? Peter Sellers appears, in every serious account of British cinema, as one of the essential performers of the 20th century. Dr. Strangelove is taught in film schools. The Pink Panther films are still watched. Being there, his penultimate film, released in 1979, in which he plays a simple-minded gardener whose blankness is mistaken for profound wisdom, earned him his 2nd Academy Award nomination. Many people who have seen it consider it his best work. He agreed with them. The question the will raises is not really about money. The money has long since dispersed. Lynne Frederick is dead. Michael Sellers is in his 70s. The estate as a legal entity no longer exists in the form it did in 1980. The question the will raises is about what a person chooses, in the formal document that survives them, to say about the relationships of their life. Peter Sellers said, in his final will, that his 3 children who had known him, who had lived in the shadow of a famous and difficult father, who had navigated the particular damage that comes from a parent who is simultaneously magnetic and absent, were each worth £800. He said this in a document signed by his hand, witnessed by solicitors, and held in probate. Whether the will reflected his genuine wishes is something no one can now determine. What is certain is that it stood. What is certain is that it was executed. What is certain is that Lynne Frederick received millions, and Michael and Sarah and Victoria received the equivalent of a second-hand television set. He left also the films. They do not require his intentions to function. They do not require his goodwill or his warmth or his presence. They exist independently of the man who made them, which may be the only form of permanence available to people whose inner life was as difficult to locate as his was. The performances remain, the rest dispersed, as it always does, into the ordinary aftermath of a life. Legal documents, contested accounts, the competing memories of people who knew the same man and experienced him entirely differently. He was 54 years old. His heart, which had been announced as failing since 1964, finally made good on its announcement. He left a will. The will said what it said.